Good morning, Erin.
Good morning.
Back for a third round. I'm glad I didn't scare you off last time.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, three interviews. Three.
Yeah.
Not one, three. We're on the end of the trilogy.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That means I'm about to marry the fairy princess and become king of Gondor, right?
Exactly. And then we move on to
Yeah.
the saga.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so last time you and I were chit-chatting about a bunch of stuff, and you took me to school on the Norse afterlife. I had no idea this was even a thing. Um, Depending on how you died or your devotion to the gods, determined where you went in the afterlife, um, which makes a lot of sense because there's certain passages I've either read or somebody's talked about, like someone losing someone at sea, and so they curse the god of the sea.
Yeah.
Um, so let's try and do like a little reverse engineering on the deities and the afterlife, the world beyond this to the Norse
Mhm.
religion. Um, so let's break it down. Like I'm 14 years old. My only spiritual experience is going to church, and I'm suddenly really interested in this Norse stuff. Chances are I most likely may have seen a show like Vikings,
Mhm.
which cool show, but I don't think does really a lot of justice on what this ancient belief is. It was the show perpetuated the stereotype that you have to die in battle to go to Valhalla.
Mhm.
And you also last time explained to me that Valhalla is not even the place necessarily you want to go to unless you want to keep fighting after you die, which was also
Right.
interesting to hear about. So let's start with going over first who are the gods in the Norse pantheon, and then what is the afterlife itself.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of gods, and there are lots and lots of them. Um, in fact, it's kind of a joke, but when I did my new edition of my book, Asatru A, Beginner's Guide to the Heathen Path. My tagline when I pitched having a new version of my book, which my old one was also true for beginners. When I pitched having a new version of my book, my tagline in my email was "New and improved, now with more gods." Yeah, because I I intentionally leave out mentioning ones that you only know the name and nothing else about them because it's not useful. So there'd been a lot more scholarship um, in between when I published the old version and when I published the new version.
Okay.
It's been like 20 years. So, um, and I put in some of the Germanic gods too, in addition to the Norse gods. So there's actually lots and lots of gods. The ones that you've probably heard of the most are the ones that days of the week are named after. Um, yeah, Sunday and Monday, obviously the sun and the moon, uh, and then Tuesday named after the god Tyr. Um, Wednesday named after Odin because of linguistic drift. That's the W dropped off in in uh, in the Norse, but not in English. Thursday Thursday named after Thor. Friday named after either Frigga or Freya, and then Saturday's the wild card. That's a big long explanation for why that didn't get a Norse god name.
Because
Um,
the Romans buy the rights to it.
yeah, well, the original name of Saturday was Laugardalr, which means bath day.
Bath Day.
That was a day for ritual cleansing
Okay.
rather than a day named for for a god or power. And then later on, people forgot why you're supposed to ritually cleanse every week, and they thought, wait, bath day, wash day, that doesn't sound right. We got six major powers in a common household chore. We better put a god name in there. So they picked Saturn, which isn't even a Norse god. So that's how that happened.
Okay. So aside from that, so if somebody wants, so let's just say specifically Norse, um, who would be the central gods if somebody's going to start? Like if I wanted to start today, I don't know anything. Who would be the primary gods?
Just a regular person. If you are not called to be a poet or a warrior or any of those things. That the most common god of the ancient world, that was worshipped by the most number of people, was Thor, and that's probably who the average person would probably be interested in now, unless they're just specifically interested in one of the other ones for another reason. Um, a lot of people who got into the Norse pagan stuff because of reading Tolkien when they were kids, felt a connection with Gandalf, who was an Odinic wanderer figure. So they might be interested in Odin. People who got into the heathenry because of watching the Marvel movies often are interested in Loki when they first start out. They might stay on with him, or they might go with another one later. It's pretty common for Odin and Loki to lead people to each other. Unlike in the Marvel, they're actually brothers. So and in mythology, brothers or sisters means that they're very compatible powers that work together a lot.
Okay, that is helpful. All right, so if I started, I'd be interested in Thor. He seems to be like the primary protector
Yeah,
in this religion. Um,
yeah.
and so why does Loki and Thor why do Loki and Thor get along together so well?
Well, they they seem to be in the if you go to the symbolic level of the mythology. You've got Thor is the god of the storm, lightning, and you know he he's a big agricultural god because you need rain for your crops and so forth. And Loki, having his main power being fire, is also related to primitive agriculture. Um, in There was a time in history when all planted fields started with fire, and that was a main way of keeping up a planted field, also to get rid of weeds and old grain stubble and so forth. So the agricultural cycle didn't only involve earth and rain; it also involved fire.
Okay. And um and quickly, because I feel like there's a lot of hot and cold. We covered part of this too when Snorri was writing um was writing his Edda. He, because Sweden liked Loki so much, he specifically vilified
Yeah,
Loki out of
right.
his spite.
Right.
Um, so if Thor's our protector, then what is Loki to us?
He is in a way he's another protector because fire is something that you absolutely need for survival if you live in the far north. Um, but fire can also get out of hand. So um, Loki himself is associated with the hearth fire and forge fire, cremation fire, fire that is useful to humankind. But there's but wildfire is associated with the Thyrses or the giants. So you have the same elemental power, fire, and when it's being used to help people, then it's associated with Loki, especially in an aspect of Vate Loki, and who was a being that was not quite a god, that kind of fused with the Asa Loki, the god Loki. But there's also Utgard Loki, the giant who's the outland Loki, is the Loki of wildfire, and that's a completely different being who is a destructive being.
Okay. So Loki is the good fire.
Right. That's right. And you don't have civilization without fire.
Okay.
And if you live above the Arctic Circle, you're not going to survive very long without fire either.
Yes, that is very true. That is 100% true.
That's right. And we haven't talked very much about the female powers yet. And one of the things I want to do today is talk about the female powers, not only the gods and goddesses, but also the the Norns. And I'm going to demonstrate some weaving. And what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to talk about how fiber art relates to the goddesses and the Norns. Okay. And I'm going to demonstrate a little weaving project from start to finish. So I'm going to talk more about weaving today and demonstrate some weaving. And switch to my
weaving glasses. Very nice.
And wait, you saw last time you saw a large weaving. Those take like a really long time. But I'm going to start. I'm going to do a really tiny little project, and you don't actually need a big loom and everything for
weaving.
For starting a small project. I'm literally using a piece of cardboard on a popsicle stick as my weaving tools here.
Okay. So you two, your next Amazon order and your next box of popsicles you buy, you can turn into a weaving project.
Right. We've talked a bit about some of
the male gods,
the gods that have powers relating to everyday life, and how agriculture and fire relate to the powers. But one of the primary things that people, specifically women, did in the old days was create fiber and use fiber. Spinning, carding, weaving, sewing. It took an incredible amount of time to make anything, and I think people don't realize what the Industrial Revolution really did as far as taking that time out of everyone's work day, because there was an incredible amount of work that had to be done just to make like one or two outfits or something.
Yeah, you'd have to grow the material, gather the material,
right,
then ready the material, and then actually make.
Right. Right. Typically, typically the two most common fibers used in the North were wool or linen, and linen is actually specifically sacred to the goddess Frigga, um, and wool practically grows itself because it's like a self-propelled little wool factory. It just goes around eating grass. One of the most common free things that just appears. So
Yeah. And do sheep and rams do they make an appearance in these religions?
yes, actually, the ram is sacred to Heimdall, the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge. So uh, the people don't realize now, but the ram is a protector of the sheep. So as the god Heimdall protects the world of the gods um, from anything getting over that bridge that shouldn't come in, and that's metaphorically how the ram protects the flock of sheep. And I'm going to warp this little loom here. That means I'm going to start putting the fibers that go in the warp direction, and the other fibers that go in the other direction are called the weft. And goddesses like Frigga and Freya, and also the Norns, are all depicted doing spinning and weaving tasks, because not only it was that something that people saw every day and was necessary for everyday life, but it was also metaphorically that was seen as the spinning was seen as something that creates basically a useful thing from nothing. The sheep wool isn't really an oppressive substance if you haven't actually made anything out of it yet. So making thread out of that, or yarn that you can use was seen as a very magical act. And metaphorically, the thread of your life is if you have a long thread, that's a long life depicted. So when you have a depiction of the Norns, each of the threads or yarns they're using depicts someone's life, and when it's made into fabric, it becomes the fabric of society, the fabric of the universe, the fabric of fate, and it's a way of thinking of a person, a single thread within a society of many threads, and how everyone everyone contributes to the total fabric of the society.
Okay.
And the Norns are often also called the Weird Sisters. That's them.
Are they just quickly? Is there also a belief that everything is all threaded together as
yes.
well? Okay.
Yeah. So you have a single thread that represents a person, and when in old stories, when someone's depicted as having a vision in which they see the Norns, if they see the Norns cutting their thread, that means they're going to die. But also there's also depictions of magic in which someone can weave for magical purposes to protect someone's life. So there are depictions in some of the old stories of a woman doing her fiber art while her husband is in battle, and the intention is to protect him and bring victory by manipulating thread and fiber in the context of making a weaving.
Impressive. Okay, so magic lesson of the day. You could save someone's life by weaving the correct piece of fiber art.
Spinning has an action like flowing with a river. You have and weaving can be like that too. Sometimes it's you're doing things with your hands that are this repetitive motions with it's like spinning and weaving is like the Viking fidget spinner. It creates an altered state of consciousness in the person doing it.
Mm-hmm. So it's also used to get in like a spellcasting mindset.
Right, exactly.
Okay, like as an example, how berserkers had their own ritual to prepare for battle.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
So I'm going to because I want to demonstrate this from start to finish, I'm going to make a really tiny little project because it takes forever to make one of those great huge ones like you saw last time.
Yeah, the really impressive tapestry you made of your cat.
Right. Yeah, that took half a year to make. So because not only because it had a complicated design, but also because how big it is.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a shed opener on here now, and I don't always use a shed opener when I'm doing one of the more complicated projects. I don't usually do it this way because it doesn't quite work that way if I'm doing something that complicated. But since I'm just doing a really tiny one today, that's how a shed opener works. And so then I end up with an end that I'm going to tuck back into the design later. So there's our first line in that project. And this being really, really tiny, it's basically just going to be like a little ornament when it's done, something you might put in your Yule tree, perhaps. In the old days, most of the weaving that was done was for practical, useful things like clothing or sails. There was an experiment done a little while ago that had a little experiment about how to make a Viking boat, and they had two men work on building the boat and two women work on weaving the sail, which the sails were woven out of wool, and it took the two men 2 weeks to carve the boat and build it, and it took the women year to make the sail. So um, you can just imagine how much of an ordinary person's time was taken up by making cloth. The action of making things out of fiber, spinning, carding, and weaving, and then sewing, depending on what you're making, is something that you would have done for, well, not you, me, but women did it. That's a whole nother thing. It's something that people would have done for hour after hour after hour. Just basically their whole lives would have been doing this, like, a lot.
Yeah, it was all built around what nowadays we consider as hobbies.
Right. Yeah. Now it's an expensive hobby. In the old days, if you didn't make yourself a new outfit before the old one wore out, you're just gonna be, if you didn't have a shift to wear, you'd be shiftless. Really, that's actually where that term came from.
Yeah,
Shiftless meaning,
the undershirt people wore.
yeah, and if you didn't have a shift, either you were lazy or your wife was lazy. Basically, that's what shiftless meant. Since I'm not making a fancy pattern, I'm just doing the same motion over and over, and I'm talking while I'm doing it. So this is something that people would have, this is something people would have experienced as part of their normal life, is that because they were just making cloth for clothes or sails or bags or whatever they were making it for. Most of the time, they were not going to be making a fancy pattern that would have required a lot of concentration. So it's something that you would get to the point where you could just do it without having to think too hard about it. That's, if you were making a spell of some kind, the repetitive motions would help you get into that mindset. But just like we're doing right now, you could also just
That's the
talk,
time. Yeah,
and people would tell stories. So catch up on the local happenings, or tell the myths.
hmm
Now we don't actually know what myths that women told each other while they were spinning and weaving together, because those are lost. The only ones that were written down were the ones that the high class men of the court were interested in. So we have no idea what the women's myths were.
Okay. Did somebody ever try to take a crack at recreating the differences as to what the women that would have been sewing all day, what the differences in the myths could have been based on the kind of lives they had, different from
Yeah.
the men who were writing it down in the courts?
Oh yes, definitely. There's been a lot of work on that, with both from heathens trying to reconstruct any uh, magical associations, and also academics have been working on the end of that, where they can examine the actual cloth and archaeological records, sites where cloth was found, what kind of cloth it is, how it was made. Um, there's actually an entire academic book that I actually read and reviewed fairly recently, and now I can't remember the name of it,
Oh,
because that's my
throw it up on
Uh,
screen.
the cloth itself and the sites where cloth was found were and also records of trade between different countries were examined, and it's especially interesting that unlike a lot of heathens that kind of just ignore the whole post conversion era, and also kind of tends to um, prioritize the religious and magical writings over common um, trade and legal writings. This um, examined a lot of those things, and one of the things that um, uh, people don't really get unless they look at that kind of thing is the incredible amount of economic power that women held in the time period when um, the women protected weaving and spinning and weaving as their own specific economic activities, and kept the men out. And we know they did that, and that's generally known within heathenism. But a lot of people don't really realize the amount of economic power that they held that way. Um, in in medieval Iceland, there was a fabric that they made, and I don't know how to pronounce it correctly because I've only seen it written, but it was looks like it may have been pronounced Valthmal, something like that. That was it was literally a legal tender. There are legal documents explaining how to use this type of fabric by the yard as a currency. So just imagine a world in which every woman has the legal right to mint currency.
Never heard of that before, but that is pretty powerful as to what women now have. I mean, that's a game changer.
Yeah,
It's a huge game changer in the ancient world.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah, just imagine what amount of economic power I personally would have if every time I finished a weaving project, I could use it to buy things, pay taxes, um, in exactly the way I would use paper money today.
that's wild.
Yeah,
That is wild.
yeah. Um, and they not only continued to use it that way during the post conversion Christian era, but it even became an acceptable way of paying church tithes. Um, so one of the things that they found, if they academics examined collections of fabrics from various parts of the heathen world and the post conversion world in continuous cultures, and one of the things they found was that there were um, there were Icelandic Christian priests wearing this stuff because they'd received it as tithes. Um, and it's just it kind of reorients the way you think about this culture. When you realize that everything we think we know about the way the church just started instantly oppressing women as soon as the conversion happens actually kind of wrong. It
Yeah,
it didn't happen that way. It was a long, slow process that took centuries. They didn't just they didn't just come in and go, okay, you have no rights now. They weren't the Taliban. That's not how it worked at all.
Um, I mean, aside from fabric arts, are there other things women did that we can even see in the religion?
Well, there are a variety of other crafts that both men and women practice, but um, the the fiber arts really have a special place in the both the main culture and the mythology. Um, uh, Probably because of how how much how much time people would spend doing it, the fact that it's a meditative, repetitive motion that you can use to get into a meditative spell casting, prayerful type consciousness, um, and and that it was a thing that created value from nothing. Um, so that was something that had a special place. The other craft that had a really special place in heathen uh, culture and mythology was smithcraft. That was usually practiced by men in the old days, although they they didn't they didn't they didn't protect any other craft from having anyone else enter it other than the fiber crafts. The fiber crafts were guarded by women against having anyone else um, enter and use the source of their wealth and power. Um, there's this whole thing in both the ancient culture and in modern times about um, how does a man become a spellcaster using women's magic, and the answer was he'd better put on a dress. The magic that women used that was specifically a women's magic called saber um, was had various functions. It was used it was used for uh, walking the worlds in spirit form. It was used to help or harm. Um, it was uh, it was used for contacting the dead, um, and it was used for fortune telling. And it's the fortune telling part is what modern Sather practitioners have mostly decided to recreate. Um, but it was used for many more things than that in the old days. But all of those things were considered women's magic, and the women protected women's magic and said no men
No,
no men
man.
allowed, except that there were men that practiced it, and they were considered to be womanly because they practiced this magic.
Hmm. So would those men have been like black sheep of society? Would they have been shunned a little bit?
Yeah, there was being depending on one's class, station, and occupation, being seen as being womanly was bad. Um, but it really depended on your place in society. Um, if you were a member of the warrior caste, which was the also the ruling class for historical reasons, then that was very bad, and it was considered a deadly insult to call someone ergi, which is uh, it, it's it has meanings that are commonly translated as unmanly, but it was really a nasty word that if I actually translated it into English, you probably couldn't put this on YouTube.
Okay.
Um,
So we'll say it's the equivalent of calling someone unmanly in a profane way.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And among the warrior caste, that calling someone that word was an acknowledged fighting word. So if you were a warrior and someone called you that, you could then fight a duel, and if you killed the other person over it, that was okay. It was an acknowledged fighting word. You're allowed to fight. Yeah. So, but if you were not a member of the warrior caste, that was another thing entirely.
Okay.
People don't like to think about this part too often, because we like to think of our heathen ancestors as being noble and good and full of right ways to do things, but and a lot of the um, a lot of the work of society in almost every civilization of the world in the old days was done by slaves. Yeah, if you were one of the unfortunate people to be in the thrall caste, it made absolutely no difference whether you were seen as being unmanly or not. Nobody cared.
Hmm. So it would have been completely okay in that instance. Nobody, it wouldn't have mattered. Huh. Were there other parts, like if you were somebody that worked in the fields, like above the above the thrall caste? So now we're, I guess I'd call it the peasant class or the working class.
Yeah, if you were in the working class called a carl, um, then that was kind of a gray area. You weren't really supposed to be fighting duels if you weren't in the warrior class. But if you were a free man, you could challenge someone to a duel if you felt like it. But after you did that, you weren't ever going to be seen the same way by society. You were going to be expected to go get on a boat and raid somewhere and participate in warrior class activities instead of being around town where you could be a problem for the regular people. That's one of the things that people don't quite understand about the whole warrior class thing, is that nobody really wanted the warriors around too much. They, um,
They were problematic and violent.
right. They
Yeah.
were technically the ruling class, because that was the people that became the jarls and kings and so forth. But um, if you started acting like the warrior class and challenging people to duels over fighting words and so forth, you're really going to be expected to go to the capital and join up with the Earl's House Guard, or become a Viking, and go a Viking, go raiding somewhere, and get out of everybody's hair.
Okay. All right. Now, a lot of people do talk about this being an honorable culture. or on the honor system. I feel as though that our modern interpretation of that comes from Victorian era literature.
Yeah.
Um, is the honor system that they're talking about less so more like the Victorian era literature and more sort of like a shogun era kind of honor code?
Yeah, you're basically talking about a form of Bushido, and the uh, the uh, shogun or warlord, as you know, very similar position to the jarl in ancient heathen society. It's someone who takes and holds power because of the force of arms, and his main function from the point of view of the ordinary people is to keep the neighboring warlord from rampaging through your town and fields and burning everything down. Um, so the main function of your king or your jarl is to protect you from the other kings. Yes, that's and that eventually that resulted in the creation of national borders and uh, nation states, modern kings, modern nationalism. Uh, the history did things with that eventually. That's
Yeah, still
yeah,
going on, still going on 2024.
right. That's right.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Okay. Alrighty. Now, quickly getting back to a subject we were talking right before this, manly, unmanly. So in 2024, I know lots changed, and I don't think people are more likely to kill each other if someone is considered manly or womanly. Um,
We don't really care about that anymore. At least most people don't. There probably still some people that do think that.
yeah, but so for people that if they want to pick this religion up and they get into the magic and they're interested in studying, maybe even practicing uh, what magic that used to have been exclusively just for women. Um, is this a form of sacrilege if they get into it, if they practice it, if they learn this, they study this?
Well, this is one of the main questions that resulted in the split between traditionalists and modernists in Asatru. Um, Modernists would say um, every gender can do whatever they want, and it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as women's magic. Just do whatever you want. Um, the traditionalists say it does matter. That's women's magic, and if you're a man and you want to practice women's magic, you have to do what the men of the ancient world did, and that is put on a dress. You have to either be gay or trans, or at least or at least you have to cross dress while you're doing the magic. That's if you wanted to be a straight man and practice women's magic in the ancient world, you would literally put on a dress and cross dress during the ritual. It was and that's actually something that a lot of different cultures did, not just the heathen culture. There are actually a lot of cultures where ritual cross dressing was part of making magic.
Okay, unique. Didn't know that.
So so um, so that's one of the major differences between the modernists and the traditionalists. And the modernist movement um, arose very recently. Um, in fact, so recently it was after I had already published the original version of my book, also true for beginners. So it was one of the main reasons that I wanted to come out with a new edition, which eventually became Asatru A Beginner's Guide to the Heathen Path, which was that I wanted to cover the modernist movement. My book is intended to be descriptive rather than prescriptive, to give you an overview of how Asatru is practiced today, rather than telling you how you should practice Asatru. So when the modernist movement arose, I felt the need to cover that movement so that people would be prepared if they happen to go to an Asatru gathering and it was modernists. If they didn't know about modernists, they'd be unprepared to understand what was going on. So so my book covers the modernist movement, and that's of course, women's magic is not the only thing in the modernist movement that's new and different, but it is a major thing, because the idea of women's magic, the idea that there's a kind of magic that only women can and should practice, is something that was part of the ancient heathenry, and also part of the modern reconstructionist heathenry. And so that's an important part of the culture, is to look how we're evolving in the modern world, and saying, okay, you know what, maybe someone's gender and sexuality should be not something that determines what kind of magic they can practice, or what kind of craft they can do, or what kind of personal occupation they should be able to have.
Okay. Yeah. Because something that was on my mind while asking that question was, I've read some stuff here and there where something might have explicitly said, in order to do this magic successfully, you do require a woman to be a part of this step,
Right.
or throughout the whole process, or it requires a particular person of a particular background.
Right.
And I was curious about that part. That is interesting that there is particular cross-dressing requirements in certain magical and spiritual practices.
Actually, something that was done in some nearby cultures that the heathen people would have been familiar with too. So it wasn't a cultural anomaly at all. It was fairly normal practice, as far as the ancient world just having this idea of what gender means, and that in the ancient world, gender was something you could literally put on and take off as clothes, which is it's a remarkable cultural idea that I think a lot of people don't realize about the ancient world.
Yeah, it was an interesting concept to have to think about for a minute. Literally, your clothing would define your gender.
Yeah. So if you were in the ancient heathen world, and you wanted to practice women's magic, you literally just put on a dress, and then you can learn women's magic. That's how it worked.
Okay.
There's even a thing about that in the mythology, where of course Odin wants to learn everything, everything that exists. He wants to learn everything. And so, of course, he also wanted to learn women's magic. So there was this whole thing in the mythology about how he went to Sam's Isle and learned the women's magic. And he learned women's magic from Freya. And there's even though the strong implication of the idea that he learned women's magic from Freya is that this was a sexual initiation, which would have been completely heterosexual because Freya being a female goddess. It was still implied in the ancient culture that this was ergi because he was learning women's magic, and also that because he became a student of Freya, a student of the goddess, that was also considered unmanly because as the king, he was not supposed to be subordinate to anyone, and being in the student position put him in a submissive position socially, so that would make Freya in a dominant position, and so that would have been considered unmanly for the king. He was already the king when he learned that magic. It wouldn't have been unmanly for anyone else, only the king, because the king isn't supposed to be subordinate to anybody else. So this is an example of how the concept of what's unmanly or what's ergi was largely dependent on one's social position. It was unmanly for the king to be subordinate or submissive to anyone for any reason, but only the king. Anyone else could have gone and learned something from a female teacher and it would have been fine.
Okay. Unique. Yeah, I can see that in the ancient world being a huge debate, huge area of controversy.
Yeah. And as you can see, I am almost finished with this little project, and so when I'm finished making the weft threads on here, I'm going to show you how I finish a project. So I will have completely done an entire little project from start to finish. This is, of course, a teeny tiny little project. So among other things, you also see how much weaving I can finish in the amount of time it took us to do this interview. What we see here is this is the amount of weaving I can do in 1 hour.
Okay, impressive.
Yeah, and that's with only doing little stripy lines like that. That's the only actual design in here is the little stripy lines, which is something that I can do by using the shed opener and just putting my weaving needle through the shed opener. The more complicated the design, the longer it would take to do. Even a design this tiny would take a lot longer than that if I was making a design other than just little stripy lines like that. So my next step here is I'm going to finish this by um, making some tassels.
And were tassels common in the ancient heathen world?
Um, in uh, tassels are fairly common in any kind of weaving. In the heathen world, usually when they made Baltmal, usually they actually made um, uh, used a starter ribbon instead of just putting it straight on the loom like this. They would use a starter ribbon, so it was actually sewn to a starter ribbon, and that's you see examples of dresses where there's band of complicated with ribbon and then be up here, and that's actually the starter ribbon. That would have been the starter ribbon, and then the thing was sewn onto it and then woven down from there. So they wouldn't have needed to tassellate it when they were done, because they wouldn't have these little loose ends up here when they were done with the starter ribbon. It was just the ribbon, and then they would have been able to take that directly off of the loom and pin it right there, and then they'd have their apron like that. Or if they wanted to make the starter ribbon into sleeves, they'd have to use like two lengths, but then the sleeves would end up with the starter ribbon as the edging, so they wouldn't have to hem it at all. So that's how they would have done that. But I didn't use a starter ribbon, so I have to
Make a tassel.
the little loose ends don't unravel.
Did people decorate the tassels? Nowadays, when people make clothes with tassels on it, they might add something to the end of it.
You could do that, but the main point of a tassel is literally just to keep your weaving from unraveling, because these loose ends here, if these are left loose, this whole thing is just going to completely apart. And we think of tassels as being a fancy addition, but it's actually a structural element. So now this edge, you see, I've in these two tassels on this end, I've actually got the ends of these yarns. So this looks like it's gotten a fancy addition, but that's also structural. It's all just structural. And of course, in the old days, the project would have started with making the yarn, and if I wanted it to have a color, there would have been a step of dyeing the yarn. Fabric dyeing and yarn dyeing is actually what I used to do as a craft before my hand arthritis made that impossible. I actually took up weaving just recently because I had to give up dyeing because my hand wouldn't do the thing anymore. Okay, now it's finished. There's the front side and there's the back side. So we have done an entire little project from start to finish during our little interview here.
Yeah, our hour-long chit chat.
Yeah. So there we did it, and that's the amount of weaving I can finish in 1 hour. So with no fancy designs, only lines. So
no fancy designs.
Now you kind of get an idea of how long it takes to make a big project like that.
Yeah. All right, Erin, anything you'd like to end this on?
If you'd like to see more of my various craft projects and hear more about my books and so forth, you can look me up on social media. I also have a blog where I talk about heathen things. I don't usually talk about my craft stuff on there unless it's related to actual religion and magic. If I'm just making a project to make a project, it's not usually going to be on my blog, but it'll be on my social media. So you can look me up on Facebook or the 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 site formerly known as Twitter, now known as Shitter, because that's how you pronounce an X, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, all those are going to be in the description box below, as
Right.
I leave in every video. But thank you again, Erin.
Thank you.